What's up, y'all? Des the Mess back once again. Today is going to be the first episode in the series talking about the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. You can see I've got my 4th edition here. I'm going to be reading out of this and then talking about it. I was someone who navigated AA for the majority of my recovery so far. I had been to AA in the past before I really wanted to get sober. I thought if I was going to AA, I just didn't have to drink alcohol. I was still smoking cannabis at the time. In the early days, we're talking 2016 to 2017, when I was kind of trying out, sort of getting into recovery. Didn't really know what I was doing. But it wasn't until 2018 that I really leaned into the program and learned ways to navigate it as a completely sober, abstinent person that would benefit me as a Satanist, as someone who doesn't believe in God, despite the God flavor of the program. So throughout this series, I'm going to be reading out of the book. I don't expect to get through a chapter every single session. I'm gonna just kind of talk for about an hour, read a little bit, talk a little bit, and once we get to the end of an hour, I'm just gonna cut it off so that I'm not rambling forever. We will be going through the entirety of the book with the exception of the forewords. I don't really feel like including them, I'll be honest. I want to get into the meat of it. So the first chapter we're going to be covering today is the doctor's opinion. To preface this, the doctor's opinion was based on a doctor who had seen some alcoholics come into recovery who were then brought into the starting of AA and made their recoveries. There's some good stuff in here. There's some bullshit in here. So we're going to dive right in. This is the doctor's opinion, page XXV, that's 25 in Roman numerals. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So right off the bat, we have the writers of the AA book, which are believed to be Bill W. and Dr. Bob, who are the two founders of AA, essentially. They're credited as being the founders of AA. There were like 20 people or so in the early days that they helped recover, but they're kind of writing this out, essentially. And they appealed to Dr. Silkworth, who is named in this book, to kind of get his opinion as a medical professional on how Alcoholics Anonymous, in the 30s at that time, could help people. To whom it may concern, writes Dr. Silkworth, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his 3rd treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man, and over 100 others, appear to have recovered. So, again, setting this up, right, you have Dr. Silkworth here talking about how he's seen about 100 people in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous who have appeared to have recovered. And they do that by reaching a point in their own recovery through the 12-step process that they begin to sponsor and therefore help other alcoholics. right? That's if you've ever heard attraction rather than promotion, right? Is someone who has completed the 12 steps for at least one round. Because a lot of people do them over and over, and I think that's important, especially in this framework. For me, I liked doing the 12 steps. They were difficult at times, but there's a lot of merit in doing them again, right? When I start back at one, it's not because I relapse necessarily, I'm taking a fresh look at, like, where am I at now? We'll get into the steps at a later time. I want to focus on this, but it's important to recognize where someone completes the 12 steps and then they start to sponsor. At this point in the book, and in their history, I don't think they were calling them sponsors yet. There's a couple of weird language things that they've developed, and not all of it's been changed out of older editions of the book into the new one. The text is mostly unchanged from when it was originally published. So, yes, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, M.D. So, huge red flag from anybody, really, is someone who says you can rely absolutely on what another person says about themselves. I'm not saying the original 100 or so, it was mostly guys in AA, were liars, right? But as a skeptic, I don't wholly, absolutely believe everything someone else tells me at face value, even if they appear to have recovered from alcoholism and addiction, or are doing some other sort of, mental health work or whatever for their own recovery. I don't simply trust people because a doctor says you may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. To me, that's kind of a red flag, right? Like, I do want to believe in the good faith that these people have recovered and therefore know what they're doing. But again, the issue, that will come into play, at least for me as a skeptic, as an atheist, as a Satanist specifically, is that I will not believe on face value that God has helped someone recover when I'm looking at the work they put in to help themselves recover. I will never give my credit away for the hard work that I did to get to this point in my own sobriety by simply giving it away to something supernatural. Even though I respect other people's opinions on their own recovery and how they got there, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're so quick to be like, I didn't do this, God did it. Bullshit. You're the one who wrote down all of the work that you did for the 12 steps. You're the one who's read this book. You're the one going to meetings. You're talking to your sponsor. You're in rehab, detox, therapy, whatever you're doing. That's the work that you're doing. And to be like, I didn't do it, God did, you're discrediting yourself. And I don't think that's good for your self-esteem, personally. It doesn't work for me, right? If I was just like, I didn't do this work, my sponsor did it for me. How the fuck am I staying sober? The answer is I couldn't stay sober if someone else was doing the work for me. I have to do this work every single day. And again, I'm not active in AA anymore, so you can think what you want about that, but it's not realistic for me to think that I should just give away the power that I have, or the work that I've done, or the credit that I owe myself for working on myself to a god, just because, that doesn't make sense to me. And that's because I'm an atheist and a skeptic, and I want to believe that the work that I'm doing will show for itself. and other people will see that, and that will attract them to my method of recovery, not by being, well, God did this for me, because that doesn't make sense, right? If you're watching this channel, I'm not discrediting AA and I'm not discrediting theists. I'm saying take responsibility for the work that you're done, right? Like, you've done a good thing. Take responsibility for it. Own up to that. Own up to that as much as you would own up to a mistake that you made. It's not about pride, right? Like, you can be humble and still be like, yeah, I fucking worked hard on this. That's well and good. You should be proud of yourself. If you're sober today and you were not yesterday, and this is your first day on the journey, be proud of yourself. God probably didn't do that for you. You did that, right? Maybe you called someone. Maybe you went to a facility. Maybe you're at a meeting, whatever. Maybe you're just watching this YouTube video because you're looking for some inspiration from how a Satanist works the recovery program. So if you saw my other video, and I'll link it up there, one of those ways. If you saw my other video about how a Satanist navigates AA, this is the meat and potatoes of it. This is right here, me reading this and talking about it. This is how I did it. I sat down and I said, no, this is bullshit and I don't believe in that. I'm not going to necessarily skip past it, but I'm not accepting that. And I'm going to figure out a way to make this work for me in a world where I didn't have options. Right? When I'm in rehab in 2018, I can't look at the guy running the place and be like, I fucking want to do Dharma recovery, or I want to do Sober Faction didn't exist yet, right? Like, I want to do my own kind of satanic recovery. I want to do this. They would have been like, get the fuck out. Like, do the 12 steps. We go to 12-step meetings. Our IOP there was focused on working alongside 12-step programs. They didn't even really care so much for NA, right? Like, it's not that they didn't do it. It was like AA, and then we had an HA meeting that was at the rehab every week. So a lot of people are not given the opportunity when they're in a place like a detox or a rehab, some sort of facility, right? They're not given the option. This is me doing the best that I could in 2018 to say, I don't fucking agree with that, but I do believe that life is much worse on the outside if I'm living in my car like I was before I went to rehab, right? I knew I needed something, and this was something, and it helped me, and it really did help me, and it's only because I found ways to work around it. So if this is you, right, this is your day 0, or day 1, or day fucking 15, and you're like, I can't do this God shit, listen up. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to tell you how I did it, and take some inspiration. Own up to the work that you're doing. This is hard fucking work. This is really hard work, and it requires some mental gymnastics. And if AA or NA or 12-step is all you've got around you, we're talking about AA, so I'm going to stick with that. If AA is all that you've got around you, and you're on my fucking YouTube channel right now reading this, or you're trying to figure out how the fuck it was that I navigated it, listen up. There's a lot of really good stuff in this book, and there's a lot of bullshit, and I'm going to dissect it. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I worked through this. And this is how. By questioning it, and by questioning myself, and by questioning my sponsor. And there were times when I disagreed with... I've had 4 different sponsors. There were times where I disagreed with them. And being able to have hard conversations about this helped me grow as a person and gave them a little bit different perspective. Why? Because we're all open-minded. I don't when I'm working AA, I don't surround myself with people who aren't going to ask hard questions and don't want to talk about these things. If your answer to me, as you know, in 2018, a recovering person trying to figure this out, is shut up and listen and don't ask questions, I'm immediately tuning you out. I would rather get high or drunk than have someone tell me I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about by asking these questions. No, absolutely question everything. Question everything, including this book. It was written in the fucking 30s. It's been revised a handful of times, and there's still a lot of problematic shit in it. Question everything. Do it for yourself. Work hard. And really fucking own up to the hard work that you're doing, because if you're on a recovery journey, it is hard work. Let's get back into the book. Dr. Silkworth says you can trust anything anybody in AA says. I say, no the fuck you can't. There are predators in AA. There are drug dealers in AA. There are people who will coax you into going to a bar in AA. Don't just trust someone because they're in AA. Because, like any other group of people, there are corrupt people within that organization. Some of them are just book-carrying members who walk into a meeting and want to drag you back out by your heels. Some of them are fucking secretaries, and some of them run meetings, and some of them work in central offices. I know, and it's sad. But this is the reality of the world. You cannot simply trust everything everyone says, especially when a book is telling you you can trust it. Don't. Ask yourself, why do I trust this person? What are they doing to help me in my recovery? What am I doing for myself? What could be a possible angle? I'm not saying get paranoid or feed into your anxieties, but seriously, surround yourself by people who really do want the best for you and prove it. Because there are predators and there are fucking nuts, awful people in this world. Let's jump back in. We're back to the writers now, not Dr. Silkworth. The physician who, at our request, gave us this letter. So they asked him to write this letter, alright? I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying, you ask someone, hey, can you write a letter about your experience with AA? What kind of angle could that have been? You know, hey, can you write us a letter in good faith? Versus, hey, can you write us a letter saying why we're awesome? I don't know. I wasn't in the room when they asked Dr. Silkworth here to write this letter. And he ends up with a second, an addendum. Okay? So, the physician who, at our request, gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. That's the addendum I was talking about. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. In the simplest terms possible, that's correct, okay? Someone who is predisposed to alcoholism, I don't want to say something wrong, but I can't... Their brain is not functioning the same way as someone who doesn't have those addictive tendencies, whether that's alcohol or heroin or whatever. If you are predisposed to alcoholism and addiction, your brain is fundamentally wired differently than someone who is not. There are people who can just pick up socially, right? They have a drink or two at a bar with dinner with friends, and then they go home. I have one drink, I want the 12th. I immediately start thinking, how fucking drunk am I going to get tonight? There's no stopping. I don't sip on a glass of wine. I fucking chug it. This is my experience, right? There's something abnormal, and to use their words, with my mind and the way my body metabolizes alcohol, and it forces me into a loop of wanting to continue to do more of it. I want the 1000th, the first one. Once I have that taste on my lips, I'm like, wow, how can I get more of this? I just want it maxed out. This is life or death for some people. This is really, truly life or death. And it's funny and it's not. It's funny in a gallows humor sort of way. But it's true. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. Now, they're very close to approaching a point here, right? On top of the fact that physically and psychologically, alcoholics and addicts are predisposed to addiction issues. They're not looking at the social aspect, right? I might have been maladjusted to life because of trauma I experienced. That doesn't excuse me picking up drugs and alcohol, but it is a reason why I picked up at different points in my life. Being in full flight from reality. For me, yes, I was afraid to address my queerness. I didn't want to consider that I might be autistic. I hid from those things. I wanted so badly not to be who I thought that I was, because I wanted to be what I thought other people thought I should be, based on social expectations, family expectations, things my friends said. I tried coming out as a queer person to my best friend, the kid I grew up with, and he said, keep that shit away from me. If you don't think that wasn't at the back of my mind whenever I felt queer as as a cis het presenting person before I was, had come to terms with my queerness, you're fucking wrong if you think that wasn't on my mind sometimes when I drink. Holy shit, I might be gay or something, and I don't know how to talk about this with my therapist, with my family. My best friend doesn't think that that's appropriate. Clearly there's something wrong with me. I'm gonna go get high or drunk and not fucking think about this, because it's too much. Now that I'm sober, I can come to terms with this stuff, right? It wasn't until I got sober that I started to understand these things about me. So yes, I was in full flight from reality. I was maladjusted to life. I wasn't taught a lot of skills. I'm still learning shit that I need to figure out at 32 years old because my parents didn't teach me. I can't tell you the amount of times usually my mom, my dad wasn't really a parent, let's be honest, but usually it was my mom, and I'm asking her adult questions at 14, 15, 16. She goes, wait till you're older. I don't want to fucking wait till I'm older. I'm mature enough to ask you the question. Respect me enough to give me an answer I can level with. I don't need to know the perfect thing. Give me your opinion. What should I be doing at fucking 16, 17, 18, trying to figure out how to be an adult? I don't know. I never learned that shit. So yeah, it's a no-brainer to me that during my 20s I was in full flight from reality, and I was maladjusted to trying to live as an adult in the adult world and pay bills on time and not accumulate debt, right? Like, no fucking wonder. And then to say that I was an outright mental defective, sort of, right? I don't like that language. I think that's super fucking problematic. And again, this is written in the 30s and has not been amended. It's been almost let's see, that Dr. Silkworth said 1934, right? And I think this was published in 37 or so. So that's been almost 90 years. And this just hasn't been... No one thought, wow, that's problematic language. Like, keep that as it is. Okay. You know what? I might consider that there were periods of time in my life when I was mentally defective in some way, specifically with addiction, and specifically not addressing my mental health issues. I can say that about myself, and I feel that's okay. For anybody else to try to say that about me, fuck you. That's ableism, and we're not dealing with that. It bugs the shit out of me when I've seen people in AA give a lead. For those of you who don't know what a lead is, that's when someone asks you to speak, right? If a meeting's an hour long, they expect you to speak 35 to 40 minutes because you have like a 5-minute, like, hey, this is our meeting, this is our protocol, blah, 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 introductions, whatever else, acknowledging newcomers, 35-ish minutes of talking, and then that last 20 minutes is like comments and then closing it out. Then you have the meeting after the meeting, they call it, which is where you hang out in the parking lot, smoke cigarettes, and talk to people about things that they said. But if you're giving a lead, your story is expected to be 30 to 40 minutes, right? I think 35 is a good sweet spot. I could never do that. I talk way too much. If you're watching this or listening in, you wouldn't be here if you didn't enjoy my talking. So... I've heard people say this at leads, right? I was an outright mental defective. That's all well and good. I don't like it. I'm not really going to talk about myself that way. But if I wanted to, I could describe myself that way. That's totally fine. These things were true to some extent. In fact, to a considerable extent with some of us. Again, I just went over that. But we are sure that our bodies are sickened as well. That's true, right? If you have developed substance use disorder... you are knee-deep in alcoholism and drug addiction, you're ruining your body. Like, that's a scientific fact. Even if it's something... A lot of people don't think that cannabis is as problematic as it can be. On top of the fact that people who are predisposed to mental illness, who then start using and abusing cannabis in a non-recreational way, they're doing harm to their mental health. On top of that... no matter what drug you're doing, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, or heroin, all of the chemicals are being filtered through your liver. Okay? Mushrooms. Mushrooms are a really good example because mushrooms are food poisoning. You know what food poisoning does? It gets filtered through your liver, and that shit goes back into your body. You will ruin your liver long term, right? Like, it's not a joke. Any chemical you put into your body is filtered through your liver, and if you abuse your liver, you're dead. You only get one. You only get one liver, right? It's not a joke. That includes cannabis. It's very hard, right? You need to do a lot of it. But if you're abusing cannabis on top of other drugs and alcohol, it's all adding up. It's all ruining your liver. It doesn't matter. Cannabis was my drug of choice. I'm lucky I have a healthy liver because I didn't always add things like alcohol on top of it. But it happens. We cannot deny that it happens. Any chemical you put in your body, nicotine, sugar, caffeine, THC, all of that goes through your liver. It all gets filtered through your liver. Your body is as sick as your mind when you are in active addiction, and it will only continue to break down and get worse. For people who kind of knew what they were talking about in layperson terms, they had some good spot-on information about this. They didn't go into great depths explaining it because the science hadn't fully evolved, and maybe some of this they knew. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the scientific history of the 20s and 30s. But the point is, they had some good metaphors, and they were on to something. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. And they're focusing on the physical thing here because they're so used to society saying that it's a moral failing, that there's something intellectually wrong with them that makes them an alcoholic, right? And unfortunately, the way AA has evolved, there is still some of that sentiment plugged in, that if you're not with sobriety, if you can't figure it out and you keep relapsing, there's something wrong with you. There's something morally, to an extent, wrong with you. And maybe no one says that outright, but they really insinuate it, that there must be something wrong with you. I know people in recovery who struggle that other people in recovery won't fucking help them out, right? It's a moral failing that you couldn't keep your job or you couldn't pay your rent. No. There are social factors. There are mental health factors. There are physical wellness factors. All of this stuff. And not a lot of it's being considered in the case of the AA program. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. This is in the addendum. We'll talk about this. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he then has a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, "The subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages." And again, right, the book of AA was written by regular Joes, essentially. I mean, they were cishet white guys with some decent money, or who came from money, at least, who developed alcoholism and other problems. So about as average, as you could get in the 1930s, considering the cross-section. Politics aside, right, these aren't fucking doctors and scientists and psychologists and stuff who are writing this book. There are people who are like, fuck, man, I can't stop drinking. You know what kind of helps? Meeting with other people. And together they formed the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as a mutual aid organization to help deter people from drinking and keep them sober once they get to that point. So, good intention, shaky impact, right? Good, bad, it hits sometimes, it misses others, it fucks people up. It really fucks people up if they can't get with this program, and then they're shamed on top of it. I'm not going to touch on that a whole lot because it'll come up as we go further in the book. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. My problem with this sentiment, again, right, this is the 1930s. I'm going to say 37 because that's the number that sticks out to me. Could have studied a little bit more of the AA history before I started talking about it, but I digress. They knew it's not enough to have a drunk come into your hospital and be like, dude, you gotta quit drinking or you're gonna die. A lot of people who use drugs and alcohol to a problematic extent understand that, right? Alcoholics and addicts are not stupid. They're not so far removed from reality that they don't know, to some extent, they will die if they continue problematic use. We know. We really do know. One way or another, we are rotting ourselves into the ground. We get it. But how do you explain that to someone? How do you get someone on an emotional, on a moral, we'll say, level to understand, like, fuck, I'm killing myself and I ought to be doing better for myself and for others? That's what the doctor's getting at, right? Like, could have been worded better, probably, but again, 1930s. There's not much that can be edited out of the doctor's word, right? Like, this is his letter that he wrote. If we're gonna update this book, we could add, asterisks and be like, well, this is what they meant at the time, and this is what we understand now. A huge problem I have with AA is that it's largely removed from the science of addiction. And as new programs have developed, and programs like SMART, and programs like Sober Faction, and programs like Arch that is starting to be put together, we're taking a scientific approach, and we're saying it's not just enough to be like, do good because it's good to do good and that'll keep you sober. We're saying why. Why am I getting high or drunk in the first place? Is full abstinence sobriety something that really works for me, or is it just something I've been impressed upon for years? Me, I have to. I can't indulge in any drugs or alcohol because any of them I'm going to do to the max. I know that. But for people who've only been put into 12-step programs where they're told it's abstinence or nothing, that all or nothing thinking can really kill people. It can. They don't leave room for harm reduction. And in the 30s, they didn't have that sort of thinking about it. They were like, if you're drinking, there's a problem with you, and we can tell you while your liver's going to shut down. You'll get delirium tremens. You're going to end up with dementia or whatever. They can tell you that until they're blue in the face, and you have to give a fuck enough about yourself to want to stop. Doctors couldn't get over that hurdle, so they leaned into the program of AA in its beginnings to help get people off of alcohol. And in a lot of ways, it did work, right? If it didn't work, AA would not be prevalent today. It would have faded out of existence. But I don't want to ever insinuate that because it's been around the longest and it works for so many people that it's perfect, because it's not. It's very far from. And that it's not doing harm, because it is, and it can, and it will continue to until it's updated and upgraded. People who get involved in AA on a political level, when they're running a meeting and then they vote on changes to the big book and changes in language and stuff like that, that is the only way things can be changed. When they do any sort of work on the big book, on updating the language of this thing. That only happens by democratic election within the AA organization. And the people who show up and say, no, this book doesn't need to be changed, it's perfect, they are no better than Bible thumpers. They are no better. I'm always going to speak out against the problematic people in AA who stand in the way of progress, because that's the way it always was and that's the way it always should be. Fuck you, shut up, get out of our way. We have lives to save, and we have people who depend on updated, relevant information. And if you're still insisting that every single thing from 1930s rich cishet white guy who didn't know what the fuck he was talking about and asked the doctor tonight to write a nice letter about AA is perfect and needs to be unchanged, you're in the way, and you're going to get people killed because they will not have access to better information, or they won't know that it's there because you're insisting that this is the only way. And that happens. That is a real thing that happens. It's not a fairy tale. If you ask enough people in AA, they know someone who says who couldn't do the program, and that person went out and probably overdosed or got into some sort of an accident and did not make it. Why? Because some old fuck told them that there was something wrong with them, or that this was perfect and they needed to just get with the program. I'm not ever going to advocate for that. If you find good things in AA, the same way I found good things in AA, latch on to those and discard all of the bullshit. Because if you don't, or if you're unable to do that, I'm not going to say unwilling. There are people who really try and can never get this. If you are unable to do that, you need to find something else. And that's the harsh reality of it. And I also understand that you can't, right? If you're in a rehab, AA might be your only option. I'm hoping beyond hope that when I talk about this stuff, I reach someone who says, if this is my only option, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, the same way that I was in 2018. My option was live in my car until I run out of money and then figure something else out. I wanted to end my life. I did, right? I wanted to crash my car on the highway, and I had enough sense to go to rehab and figure it out. Not everyone has that privilege, and not everyone has that option. I'm really hoping someone out there sees messages like mine and is able to grab those people by the arm and be like, this doesn't have to be it. There are other options. There are better options. Throughout this series, I'm going to be dissecting this book and I'm taking a really fucking hard look at it. I'm going to tell you every problem that I have with it now and problems that I had with it in the beginning, and what works and what doesn't, and the stuff that doesn't work really needs to be refined, because if it isn't, it will continue to harm and kill people, and that's a very sad fact. I don't want to make this a dark, depressing episode. I really don't want to. But I will say that the nature of this discussion is extremely serious, and people's lives depend on it. And turning people away from AA, either by saying they don't belong there, or they just don't get it, or they're trying to change too much, or they just need to get with it, or whatever, you're gonna hurt people. You're going to hurt people, and they're going to die. And these are preventable deaths. If you can get the right resources into someone's hands, you have a much higher chance of them finding recovery and living another day. The second you start putting on the impression that there's something with them that needs to change specifically to adapt to this obviously outdated program, then it's on you. And I'm always going to blame a bad sponsor. I'm always going to blame a bad sponsor for a sponsee who goes out because they quote-unquote couldn't get it. That person needed help that you couldn't provide, and you got to figure your shit out. And you owe it, right? You want to do good? You want a 12-step in this world? We'll get into that towards the end of the book when they talk about this isn't the only way. They say that. If you can find a better way, you should do it. They say that in the book. And I don't know why there are people in AA who gloss over that. Well, this is the only way, and this is what works for me. I'm glad. I'm glad that you get to live another day and be a fucking asshole. You know what? I'm not glad that the person that you told that didn't. They don't get to come back. They don't get to come to that meeting and hear you be an asshole again. I have had the privilege of being in meetings where I cringed at some of the shit that old crusty men said, because that's it for them. They figured it out and they got the answer. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad you get to live another day and you told some atheist or some trans person or some person who believed in harm reduction to fuck off because you didn't believe in them. That's not for us to say. That's never for us to say. That's going to come up later in the book, and we're going to really, really dig into that. Let's get back into the reading here. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. I believe they're talking about Bill W. there. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. This was the early days. He figured out he could get sober through the creation, essentially, of this program, and then came back to help another alcoholic. That's a noble thing, right? When we recover, there is some sort of expectation that we're going to give back to the community and help other people recover, right? I don't believe that we're saving... I'm not going to save someone's life, but I want to impress upon them that they can save their own, whether that's through AA or Sober Faction or Arch or SMART or Pagans in Recovery or Recovery Dharma / Refuge. There are so many programs. And someone out there requires one and not the other, or requires 2 or 3 of them working in tandem. And that's okay. But I never ever want anyone to think that it's one way or else. There's always some sort of other option. If you want recovery, you can find it. And more people should be open to pluralism in the recovery community. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive. That wasn't always true, by the way. Bill W. wanted to run AA like a business, and everyone else around him was like, you're an asshole, it's gotta be a nonprofit organization. We cannot make this our job. We cannot make this our job. And I believe that to this day. There should be zero profit motive. The second you put profit motive into someone else's well-being, you stop caring about the individual and you start caring about how you can monetize their wellness. That's a huge problem with capitalism at large. They knew enough, even if they weren't using that language, they knew enough back in the early days of AA when they founded it as an organization that would become this giant nonprofit that it is. They knew enough that they cannot make this a profit, capital-driven thing. It has to be about helping people. That's what makes it anarchist / socialist. That's what makes it a mutual aid organization. That's a fact, right? If this was profit-driven, it would immediately be capitalistic. The fact that it's based in direct democracy and it's non-profit, it's not perfect. And I do not want to ever insinuate that it's perfect. There is so much good stuff in the way that AA is crafted and what it could be if it really followed through on the more positive aspects of the anarchism that it was formed out of. Even if they didn't know, even if the founders didn't realize that what they were doing was an experiment in anarchistic direct democracy, that's what they've done. They created a mutual aid organization that has helped save countless amounts of lives. And that's why I'm dissecting it. Because I care about this sort of stuff. Because I'm politically and socially active. Because I understand that there are problems with it and it could be done better. And I'm hoping in some of this that someone else sees this or hears it and says, you know what? I want to be that fighting change. Maybe I should. Maybe I should get back involved with AA and be making these changes instead of sitting from the sidelines. I've thought about that, but that's a conversation for another time. So, the unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. Again, the doctor. He's treated alcoholics as much as he could and found most of them to be hopeless. They just in and out of the hospital, right? Something I do believe that AA got correct is jails, institutions, and death, right? You get drunk enough times, you get in trouble. You're either going to drive drunk or get in a fight or hurt your girlfriend or something. Like, that's almost unavoidable. Unless you're totally socially isolated, have enough money to live by yourself, you probably are going to get into some sort of legal trouble. Then you get into institutions. Well, you've been drunk so many times, the judge starts throwing you at rehabs and hospitals. And again, in the 30s, they didn't have this right. They didn't have that. They didn't have the massive amount of rehabs like we do today. They didn't have all these detox clinics. They didn't have progressive health places. You couldn't just... You had to, like, go to another state and hope that, if you've done your research, essentially, you would go to another state that had a hospital that specialized in the treatment of alcoholics. And essentially, they would pump you up full of meds and water and tell you, hey, dude, if you drink again, you're going to be right back here. Or you will die. That's the third option. Jails, institutions, right? You're either in a hospital or a mental institution back then, or death. Those are kind of the only options once you start getting into drugs and alcohol, because it almost inevitably goes downhill. It might not be day one, right? But it happens. It happens to almost everybody. Most people that I know who are in recovery have some sort of a criminal history, right? Either that or they've been to mental hospitals or in and out of emergency rooms or detox or rehab or whatever. Some of them have died and come back, and other people don't. That's it for us. They believe in themselves, and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. This is where they start talking about God, the power with a capital P. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. Always, if you're struggling with active alcoholism or addiction, please go to a doctor, go to an emergency room, go to a detox. Do not detox on your own. You can die. You can. Like, your body shuts down. You get such a dependency upon these chemicals, specifically alcohol. Right? Alcohol, you can die from the withdrawals. Heroin withdrawal will make you wish that you were dying because of how painful that is. I don't know. I've never done that, thankfully. I really hope I never experience it. Don't plan to. But I've known enough people who've done it that they said they wish they would die. It's one of the most awful things they've ever experienced. You can really lose your shit if you're DTing from alcohol by yourself. Please don't do it. Please don't detox by yourself. This often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. If you are not in decent enough physical health to recognize that you gotta work on your shit, whether that's getting sober, working on your mental health, whatever, if you aren't first treated for the physical condition that got you to that place, it's not going to happen, right? Like, it just won't. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving, that's one of my favorite lines out of AA literature, the phenomenon of craving, right? The phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types. Allergic is a metaphor here. They say that alcoholism in the 1930s was the manifestation of an allergy. There's something about it that triggers us to want to keep doing it. It's almost the opposite, right? It's kind of the opposite of an allergy. I have seasonal allergies, so I sneeze when I go in and out of buildings because of dust particles and pollen and all that other stuff. I've done that my whole life, right? Here in San Francisco, I did it in Cleveland. I definitely did it when I lived in the woods and mountains in Pennsylvania. That's an allergy. I want to avoid that. When they use allergy as this metaphor here, that alcoholism is an allergy in alcoholics, they're kind of saying the opposite, right? It's, I don't want to say satire, but it's an exaggeration, right? They're saying it's the manifestation of an allergy, right? Something about it just really checks that fucking box for us, and we want to keep doing it. The phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Most people who can handle social, moderate drinking don't crave the next drink. Anytime I was getting high or drunk, when I'm starting the first one, I'm thinking about the next one. That has been true my entire life, right? With the exception of like the first time that I ever tried them. Every time after that, I was like, I can't wait to get more of this in me because it makes me feel good temporarily. I grew to understand that's a sign of addiction. When I'm focused on how many of a thing I can get inside of me, drinks specifically, weed specifically, when I'm focused on how much of that shit I can push in me from the first taste of it of the day, that's a problem. That is a huge problem. That's the phenomenon of craving. It happens when I'm in active use and the second I light that lighter and I take my first puff, I'm like, holy fuck, I want all of this. And I want all of it right now. And it happens after extended amounts of abstinence, picking up for the first time. My brain inevitably thinks, how can I get more of this? That's the phenomenon of craving. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. When they say that, they're talking about drugs. They're also talking about the idea that, like, oh, I just get like that when I drink whiskey, so I don't drink whiskey anymore. You know, like, I can handle beer, but I can't handle vodka. Like, for me, it doesn't matter what it is. I don't have to like the alcohol. Once I start getting that feeling of inebriation, I want more of it, even if it sucks. That's a sign of alcoholism. That's the phenomenon of craving. That is knowing that I'm of the type that allergy, quote unquote, has developed, that I want more of it. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. That's jails, institutions, and death, right? That's I can't pay my bills on time. What happens if you can't pay your bills on time? After a while, you lose your car. Why? Because you couldn't pay it off. Okay, you lose your car. Well, now I can't get to work. Now if I can't get to work, I don't have money coming in. If I don't have money coming in, I can't pay my rent. Now I'm homeless. Well, I'm homeless, I gotta steal to get by because I don't have a car. I've developed an alcohol and drug problem that's gotten me to the point of not being housed anymore, and I'm stealing, and now I'm engaged in even more criminal activity and drugs. And again, this is not always the fault of the individual. There are a lot of social and political reasons why people engage in alcohol and drugs. But the problems that result from the pile-on is what they're talking about here. The idea that once you get that ball rolling, the problems just snowball, and they will run you the fuck over. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Doctors, family, friends, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your them friend will not be able to tell you, I wish you would stop, and have you listen to them clearly if you are so far into your addiction already. That's the frothy emotional appeal. That is your partner crying because you can't spend time with them because you're fucked up all the time. That's that frothy emotional appeal. Your mom tugging at your wrist. please don't leave. I know you're going to go get high. I know you're going to overdose. That's a frothy emotional appeal. Your doctor telling you your liver is going to fail. You've got delirium tremens and you're getting brain damage. You're going to end up with wet brain or worse. That's a frothy emotional appeal. If you are so lost in the sauce, it doesn't matter what anybody else tells you. To an extent, you have to want to change enough to put down the drugs and alcohol. But again, this is compounded by social and political issues and your environment and things like trauma and mental health. There are so many factors that go into this that even if someone really wants to change, it doesn't mean they can, or that they will have access to resources which enable them to do so. And that's important to recognize too. There's a lot of politics and stuff that are not left into this book, and it's really unfortunate because they either didn't know or they didn't care enough to think about that, right? There are so many problems that go into an alcohol or an alcoholic or a drug addict having the problems that they have. And it's just glossed over or not mentioned because 1930s, right? They didn't think, gee, maybe this guy didn't start doing drugs, or maybe this guy didn't become homeless because he's doing drugs. Maybe he started doing drugs because he's homeless, right? It's not always one and then the other. It's not, there's just so much, there's so much to this that the book can't possibly touch. And that's just what it is. The message, which can interest and hold these alcoholic people, must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. This is why I am more likely to believe that the people in AA were like, can you write a good thing about us and talk about how great we are, and not, can you give us an honest assessment? I could be wrong. Okay? I'm not an AA historian. I'm reading the book as it's been presented to me. I probably could and probably will at some point in the future pick up history books about AA specifically, because there are a few and they expose some pretty dark and damning shit about the people who founded it. But this information, as it's given to us, is misleading. Okay? I want to make that really fucking clear. That the idea that this doctor just, they're like, oh, can you write us a letter and tell us what you think? I think there was more to it than that. And the idea that he's using the language, power greater than themselves. I understand that he's read the book, supposedly, at this point, right? He has read their very first edition of the book, or I don't know what you'd call it. I would call it a demo if I'm thinking about music or video games, but they're like pre-published copy where they're like, hey, we're writing this book, what do you think about it? Like, this is the program we're trying to put out. He's read it at this point. He understands what goes into it. So using that language, a power greater than yourself, they mean God. They mean that spiritual approach that they're talking about, which for people who believe in God is a really good thing. And I really hope people who believe in God and also have drug and alcohol problems find help that they need by reading that and thinking like, oh fuck, I can lean into that. For atheists, that's got to be redefined, and we'll do that later. We'll get to that. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line, see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. Doctors in the 30s were overwhelmed by alcoholism, especially, you gotta think, the 20s was the Great Depression. People who didn't previously have alcohol problems developed them, or they were predisposed and that was activated, right? Lost all their savings, living in, fucking whatever, the worst conditions. They were unhoused because the Great Depression happened. The stock market crashed. Suddenly they lose their house, their job, their company shuts down. People developed serious alcohol problems throughout the 20s, and now it's the 30s. So this doctor, the bulk of his career at this point was during the Great Depression, serving people who developed drug and alcohol problems that they didn't have whatever, right? That's sort of left out. They do touch on some of that because it was relevant during the 20s and 30s. They touch on some of that, but a lot of that's left out in modern terms. And I think that's a huge disservice to a lot of people. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. At that point, that was basically true. There were a handful of recovery programs, and not all of them were effective. AA, at that point in time, was becoming the most effective. And arguably, because of the nature of it being around the longest, the data would suggest that it is the most, right? But we now have to look at modern data and modern needs, and that's going to be left out. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, phenomenon of craving. The sensation is so elusive that, while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented. That comes up a lot in AA verbiage. People talk about being restless, irritable, and discontent, right? I'm restless when I can't have my drugs. I'm irritable. I'm a bitch to other people because I can't have my shit. I am discontent. I am so out of my life. I want nothing to do with it unless I've got my drugs and alcohol. That was true for me, and it's true for a lot of people. And that's just the way it is. If we're predisposed to alcohol and drug addiction and then we engage in it, we instantly become irritable, restless, discontent. We want those things, or else. And that's what it is for us. Knowing that they're killing us, slowly destroying us. Sometimes quickly, depending on the drugs they're doing. We know, and we still engage in it. There's something wrong with that picture. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks or drugs which they see others taking with impunity. The idea that someone else can just smoke a joint and then go to work and do it, right? Keep their job and pay for their bills. That floors me. I'm over 3 years sober, and I still don't know how other people do that. Because when I start doing that, I quit my job. I'm like, I can't fucking work. I'm not doing this. I don't want to do that. I want to get roasted and play video games until I get kicked out. And risk homelessness. And lose the girlfriend. And lose the friends. And whatever. I ruin my life when I pick up weed. So seeing other people just be able to light up on a corner, I'm partially jealous, knowing that they might not experience the same problems I do. But that's okay. I'm not judging them. I'm dealing with my shit. I understand I can't do that. I don't know how the fuck they do it. I don't. I still can't figure that out. But they do. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and continue to do, and do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is true with most drugs, and definitely alcohol. I didn't always feel that way when I was smoking weed. I was just, I felt kind of dumb, like, oh, well, I'm doing this again, I guess, I'm not working right now, I might as well get high. There's not so much of the remorse. The idea of waking up with a hangover and feeling like garbage and all that stuff, I can understand. Or being hospitalized, or waking up in a jail, I can understand. Or being fucking Narcaned, right? That sense of remorse, like, fuck, I killed myself again. Yeah, I don't understand from an individual perspective. I understand why someone would feel remorseful and be like, I'm never doing that again. But some of them think like, oh, well, I'm going to do that again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, the will to want to change, that, environment aside, to an extent, you have to be the person that's like, fuck, I gotta get sober, I gotta get into recovery, I gotta figure this out. Experience an entire psychic change. There is very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules, which they outline in this book. Cha-ching. You smell where the money is going? Yeah. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot." I love acting that out. I think it's hilarious. "You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Again, doctors cannot stop you from doing drugs and alcohol, no matter how much they care about you. And a lot of them can only care so much because they're dealing with all these other patients. Even if that's their job, to deal specifically with drug addicts and alcoholics, they're not going to be able to care enough. They have to have a cutoff. And to a certain extent, that makes them feel inadequate. It makes me feel inadequate when a friend of mine is struggling and I can't fucking convince them, "Hey, doofus, stop doing drugs and alcohol and you won't struggle so much." It makes me feel inadequate. Why? Because there's no perfect thing for me to say. There's nothing I can do to stop them. At some point, they have to want to stop and also be able to get resources to help them stop and stay stopped, or it's just not going to happen. And I can talk until I'm blue in the face and suffocating, and they're not going to figure it out until they do. That's just what it is. It's sad. Although he gives all that is in him, it often is not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. They're talking about God. My idea of higher power is always rooted in community and the desire to do better for myself. For me, my higher power in this sense is the version of me that can do better, right? I'm doing what I'm doing today for Desi of tomorrow. That's why I do it. Because I know if I stay sober today, I have a better fucking chance of staying sober tomorrow. That's bottom line for me. That's higher power. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. That's, again, doctors can only do so much. There's so many factors going into someone's recovery and success in recovery. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. It isn't. It simply isn't. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. That goes back to what I was talking about. No matter what is going on in my life, if I pick up drugs or alcohol, I almost immediately want more of them. That's just what it is. Everything could be going right in my life, and I will sabotage all of it once I start getting high and drunk. That's what it is for me. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice, they're talking about suicide, rather than continue to fight. So many people feel they're totally hopeless and cannot stop using that they intentionally overdose or do something awful, usually while they're inebriated, because they're just like, can't do this anymore. They can't. Do I blame them? No. Do I wish it happened? Fuck no. I want everyone who can find recovery, who is able and willing to do so, to do so. But it's not realistic, and that's sad, but it's a fact. Something I have written in This is my reading copy of the big book. Something I have in my working copy that I've got all my highlights and notes in. People will die. That's a really fucking hard pill for a lot of folks to swallow. You could be going to a meeting for months in person, right? And sit next to some guy. Hell, you could pick that person up and go to the meeting together. One of you drives, one of you buys the dinner afterwards when you're all hanging out. And they pick up one day and that's it. That's a fucking reality. That's a dark reality. And sometimes it's their doing that they're just like, I can't do this. And they take their own life. That's sad. It's really fucking sad. And it's something I'm conscious of. And it's something I'm very afraid of. I don't want any of my friends to die. But I accept that this is a reality of the condition of our recovery. That it's gonna happen. There's going to be one day where I'm going to get a phone call I really don't fucking want. I'm not prepared for it. I'm not going to be prepared for it with 10 years sober, 20 years sober. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to be prepared. I don't want that. I don't want that for anybody. I don't want anybody to get that phone call. It's going to happen, though. It's going to happen. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths. Again, problematic language because we use the word psychopath differently than they meant to hear. The psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. You know, I think this is... We're nearing the end of this chapter, but I think this is becoming a good stopping point. Why? Because I want to elaborate on the psychopath bit. And then we can pick this up again in the next episode of the series. But there are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. The thing is... When they used the term psychopath, back then they meant someone who is just mentally off-kilter. Now, psychopath, on a colloquial level, means like a serial killer. So, little bit different context. Also, the problem with using the term psychopath is that in modern context, it typically refers to someone on the, I'll say, more stable side of ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. Psychopaths are not evil by nature, right? They're also not mentally broken or mentally defective. They're not necessarily emotionally unstable. I don't like using the terms psychopath and sociopath in a clinical sense because you're using a colloquial term for an actual diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. In this book, at the time that it was written, it just meant someone who was emotionally unstable. I understand that. I still disagree with its usage. And the fact that they're probably not ever going to edit this out, right? They want the doctor's opinion to make the AA book and the AA program at large look good. I understand that. But without an asterisk that says, like, hey, the meaning of this word has evolved over time and currently means this, or whatever. Any sort of addendum to this addendum to be like, look, this isn't what it fucking means, and it had a different context, would be appreciated. Right? This is the 4th edition of the book. They're currently in the process of kind of approving a 5th edition to let you know, right? This has been the copy for, I want to say, 10, 15 years or so. It's not going anywhere. And neither is that word, even in the 5th edition. I've not been in the talks for that. I know they're not touching that. They're just going to leave it. They're not even going to consider it. Why? Because they're not looking at the evolution of language. They're just simply not. So, there are psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. I understand that on a colloquial level. But when you're putting that in a fucking recovery book, you're making it seem like people who can't recover are just sometimes psychopaths. And in a 2023 context, when most people who use that word mean that they're a serial killer or some high-profile criminal or whatever, it paints a weird picture. It paints a really weird picture. So I'm gonna stop there. I talked way too much. I thought I would get through. This isn't even the first chapter, right? This is the prelude chapter, the doctor's opinion. The first chapter starts on page actual 1 with Bill's story. We are literally half of this page and we're about a page and a half away from finishing that chapter. And I think that's a good place to stop. This isn't an AA meeting. I don't need to fucking tell you. You either know or you don't. Here we are, okay? We are finishing up the doctor's opinion next time we meet. If you're watching this in the future when multiple episodes are recorded, pretty easy transition. You can probably skip the rest of what I'm about to say. Here's my closing statement. Right now I'm doing YouTube for free. I think it's fun. I think it's awesome. I like talking about these things. I like reading and discussing AA culture. If you've seen the other series I started, which I'm gonna be doing for next week's video because we're rotating between 2 series right now, talking about ICP's music and religion, spirituality, and politics and all that stuff. You get it, right? If you're here, if you've arrived at my channel, you understand this is what we're talking about. Politics, philosophy, religion, spirituality, psychology, anything brain and social. We're talking about it. We're really getting into it. I'm doing this for free. I like doing it for free. But if you want to donate, click one of my links below. Send me preferably a Venmo or a Cash App. I don't really like using PayPal. I think it's ridiculous. I just do. It's a preference thing. Click one of my links. Send me a couple bucks. Let me know you liked what I had to say by showing it via capitalism coupons. Comment below. Let me know what you think. If you're in AA and you disagree with everything I have to say, cool. I don't care. There are people in AA who I trust and who I love and who I still support and who support me who don't agree with the things that I say about AA, and that's well and good. I didn't make a whole lot of friends in AA. I didn't try to. I connected with people who saw things pretty similarly to the way that I do. So the people who don't agree with me, oh well. That's what it is. I'm an atheist. I am a Satanist. I am a socialist. I am an anarchist, and I'm looking at the AA book and all of the problems and how it could potentially be used for good things in a context that applies better to people who can relate to it from a position like mine. So, whatever. I'm not going to argue with other people about it because we're going to look at it differently. We just are. But if you like what I do have to say, comment below. If you don't like what I have to say, comment below. If you leave hate comments and I find them, I'm just going to delete them because I don't argue with people on the internet because you're wasting your time, but you're not going to waste mine. That's first and foremost. You're not wasting my time. If you've gotten this far in the video, I've wasted yours if you disagree with me. So just think of it that way. All right. If you like what I have to say, follow, like this video, subscribe, follow me on Threads. I'm using Threads to talk shit. That's what I use it for. I wish it was memes. I'm almost falling out of my chair there for those of you watching. I wish it were memes, but I don't want to use Threads for memes. Follow me on Threads. I got things to say. Follow me on my public Instagram because that's where I post my updates. Follow me here on YouTube. You'll probably get my updates if you click the little notification bell. Comment below. Shoot me a message. Let me know what you think. You know, I want engagement here. I want to talk to people about this. I want to know how you worked AA and how it worked for you if you don't fit into the stereotype of what an AA person should be doing. I want to know how it worked for you. I really do. I want to know if AA was your only option at the time that you got sober, how you worked it as an atheist or a Satanist or generally not someone who believes in GAWD, right? Like, tell me about it. Tell me what's working for you now. What programs do you work? What resources do you have? How can we have a productive conversation about getting people hyped up about recovery and wanting to save their own life, right? Like, what can we do? What can I do better? What can you do better? Let's talk about it. I'm here. I'm listening. I'm going to keep putting out content like this. You already know. I'm working on making I got a friend working on some jingles, so we're going to have, it's going to feel more official. I'm going to start cutting out the video factor and do an audio format so I can translate this to an official podcast style. As I said, I'm going to have some upcoming talks with friends, and we're going to talk about stuff like this, right? Tell me what you think. Really, lay it on me. Good, bad, ugly, neutral. Did it suck? Do you like it? Do you want to hear more of this? Even if you don't, too bad, because I'm doing another video like this in 2 weeks. But here I am. I have been Des the Mess. My pronouns are still she, her, and they, them. I fucking love you. Be who you are. You are worth recovery. Go and get it if you ain't got it. And if you do got it, give it away to someone else who needs it. Why? Because we all could use the positivity and hope. Hail all of you.